My wife just announced she's pregnant, but she has no idea that I'm infertile and can't have kids. Imagine hearing the words, "I'm pregnant," from your wife. You're ecstatic, overwhelmed with emotion, and ready to begin one of the most exciting chapters of your life. But deep down, something is wrong. You've never shared with her the truth about your infertility. And now, her pregnancy news is triggering an impossible dilemma that could change everything. The weight of this moment is overwhelming. She is happy, excited, and full of hope. Meanwhile, you are silently trapped in a secret that could destroy everything. You've spent years trying to avoid this conversation, but now you find yourself caught between your love for her and the truth that could tear you both apart. Will you keep the secret and risk losing her trust forever? Or will you tell her the truth and face the consequences of a decision that could shatter her heart? How will this moment shape the future of your relationship? Stay tuned to hear how this story unfolds. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. For years, I had kept a secret from my wife, a secret that haunted me in the quietest moments and weighed heavily on my heart whenever we talked about our future. She was everything I ever hoped for in a partner: understanding, kind, intelligent, and fiercely supportive. Together, we had built a life full of shared memories, laughter, and dreams of the future. We'd even talked about having children, about raising a family together, and creating our own little world. But there was one thing I could never bring myself to tell her. The truth was I couldn't have kids. I had known about my infertility for years before we even met. When I received the diagnosis, it felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. It wasn't something I could easily accept, but over time, I learned to live with it. I came to terms with it in my own way. But there was still one thing that troubled me: my wife's dreams of having children. When we first started dating, I thought about telling her, but I was terrified of losing her. I feared that if she knew, she would leave me. I wasn't ready for that. So, I kept it to myself. Over the years, we built our life, and she continued to talk about our future with excitement. She envisioned a home full of laughter, of children running around and making memories. I smiled along with her, nodded, and pretended that I shared the same enthusiasm. But in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. The one thing I couldn't give her, the one thing she longed for, was something I could never provide. The thought of telling her filled me with dread. What would it mean for our relationship if I told her? What would it do to the future we'd both dreamed about? Then, one afternoon, everything changed. She called me at work, her voice shaky with excitement, and told me the news that would change everything. She was pregnant. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, stunned, unable to comprehend what she was saying. She was carrying our child. It didn't seem possible. For all the years I had hidden my secret, I now had to face the reality that it was no longer something I could ignore. Suddenly, the truth was out there. How could I tell her now? How could I face her with everything I'd kept hidden? How could I live with the weight of my own secret when she was so full of hope, excitement, and joy? When I met my wife, I thought I'd found someone who truly understood me, someone I could build a life with. We connected in ways I never thought possible. We shared our deepest fears and dreams, and we both envisioned a future together. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother. She spoke about it often. She imagined what it would be like to raise a family, the kind of parent she would be, and how she would love her children with everything she had. We talked about it all the time, and every time the subject came up, I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I wanted to be the man she needed, the man who could give her that dream of children. But I knew deep down that it was never going to happen. While I was younger, I had been diagnosed with infertility. It was a blow I never truly recovered from, and I had made peace with it in my own way. I convinced myself that it was just a part of who I was, and I could still live a full life. But the weight of this secret hung over me, especially when my wife spoke so openly about wanting children. I had been given the news when I was in my early 20s, and it changed everything for me. The doctors told me that I wouldn't be able to have children. At the time, it felt like my entire world came crashing down. I mourned the future I thought I would have, the family I had imagined raising. But over time, I learned to accept it. I realized that while I couldn't have biological children, I could still be a great partner, a loving person, and a father figure in other ways. But then came my wife. She had always been so kind and supportive, always understanding. She would talk about adopting children if we couldn't have biological ones, and I would nod in agreement. But I never told her the truth. I never told her that I couldn't have children at all. The thought of losing her, of disappointing her, was unbearable to me. And then, everything changed when she told me she was pregnant. I froze. I had spent all these years pretending, and now, the truth was threatening to tear everything apart. How could I tell her now? How could I explain something that had been buried so deep inside of me for so long? The moment she told me the news, I felt both elated and terrified. Elated because this was what she had wanted for so long, and terrified because of the looming truth that I could never be the father she envisioned. In that moment, the excitement in her voice rang in my ears, but a cold, heavy weight pressed down on my chest. How could I possibly tell her the truth now? The lie had gone on for so long that it felt like a tangled mess I had no idea how to untangle. For days after she broke the news to me, I could hardly think straight. She was making plans, picking out baby names, and talking about setting up the nursery. Meanwhile, I was caught in a whirlwind of panic, trying to figure out how I could manage to live up to her expectations without completely shattering her heart. Every time I looked at her, all I could think was that she had no idea of the storm that was brewing inside me. I started avoiding the subject, skirting around her excitement, like it was a dangerous minefield. I would nod and smile, pretending to be as thrilled as she was. But in reality, I was just trying to keep the truth from coming to light. It was harder than I ever imagined it would be. The more she grew excited, the more distant I became. But then, one night, after a long day at work, I came home to find her on the phone with someone. I didn't think anything of it first. I thought she was talking to one of her friends, planning a baby shower, or discussing nursery ideas. But then I heard her say something that made me freeze in place. I know, I've been careful, but I'm still nervous. What if he finds out before we're ready? Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was trying to keep it a secret. I stood there, confused, and felt a shiver run down my spine. Who was she talking to? And what was she nervous about? Her words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. She had been acting different lately, distant in a way that I couldn't put my finger on. The following days were filled with growing unease. I noticed little things that seemed off. She would glance at her phone whenever I was around, quickly putting it down when I approached. There were moments when she seemed distracted, lost in thought, as if she was worried about something but didn't want to talk about it. The atmosphere in our house had changed. I was no longer the man she came home to with excitement about the future. Instead, I felt like an outsider in my own home, left to watch her drift away from me. It wasn't long before I made the decision to do something I never thought I would do. I started to snoop. I knew it wasn't right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I needed to uncover. I started going through her things when she wasn't home, checking her phone for messages, anything that might reveal what was going on behind the scenes. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I was desperate to know the truth. What was she hiding? And then, one day I found it. It was hidden under a pile of old receipts and papers on the kitchen counter, a small, folded piece of paper. My heart raced as I picked it up, unfolding it to reveal a name and an address. It took me a moment to make sense of it, but once I did, everything clicked into place. The name on the paper was someone I didn't recognize, someone I had never heard her mention before. The address was a few blocks away from where we lived. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. There was more going on here than I had ever imagined. I spent the next few days trying to gather more information. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my suspicions were growing with every passing hour. The more I dug, the more I found. Text messages between her and this man, calls exchanged late at night, and conversations filled with intimacy and secrecy. It was all there, plain as day, and it hit me harder than anything ever could. My wife, the woman I loved, was hiding an affair. She had been lying to me for months, telling me everything was fine while she was building a secret life behind my back. It was a betrayal I never saw coming, and it shattered everything I had believed about our marriage. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had always trusted her, and now I was staring at the truth. She was having an affair with someone. The man she had been talking to was not just a casual acquaintance. He was someone who had become a part of her life in a way that I could never have imagined. She had kept this hidden from me for so long, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a marriage I thought was unbreakable. But what stunned me the most wasn't the affair itself. It was the fact that she had been planning a future with me, talking about the child we were going to raise together, while hiding this dark secret. She had built this false reality around our life, one where everything seemed perfect, and I had been living in it, blind to the truth. The reality of it all hit me hard. I stood there, looking at the messages, the paper with the address, and the painful realization that I was just a part of her deception. I was no longer the person she had promised to share her life with. I was just a pawn in a game that I never even knew was being played. The days following my discovery felt like they lasted an eternity. I had uncovered the truth, and now I was faced with the impossible task of deciding what to do with it. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sense of loss. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led up to this point, her smiles, her words, the future we had envisioned together. It was all a lie. Every promise she made, every dream we shared, had been built on a foundation of deception. I knew I had to confront her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it immediately. I needed time to process, to gather my thoughts, and to figure out what my next step would be. In the meantime, I couldn't help but watch her from afar as she continued with her life, oblivious to the fact that everything had changed. She was still excited about the pregnancy, still making plans for our future, unaware that her world was about to collapse. Then, one evening, As she returned home from work, I knew it was time. The air in our home felt thick with tension, and I could barely look at her without the truth clawing at me. She walked through the door with a smile on her face, and for a brief moment, I almost wished I could go back to the way things were, before the lies, before the affair. But it was too late. The mask of normalcy had been shattered, and now I had to face the woman I thought I knew. She noticed something was off almost immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if she could sense the storm brewing inside me. But there was no turning back. I had to say it. I had to confront her. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about the affair. I know about him." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she was silent. It was as if the words had stolen her breath away. She opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again, as if searching for the right thing to say. I watched her, waiting for her reaction, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Instead of the apology or the guilt I expected, she simply stared at me, her expression hardening. "So what? What do you want me to do? You just want to leave me, aren't you? I already know what this is. You'll use this as an excuse to make me the villain." Her voice was cold, defensive, as if she was more concerned with her own self-preservation than with the damage she had done. I was taken aback by her response. The anger in her voice surprised me. It wasn't the reaction I had imagined. I thought she would cry, beg for forgiveness, or at least show some remorse. But instead, she stood there, defiant, almost as if she was daring me to accuse her further. "You don't even care, do you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You don't care about the marriage, about me, or the life we built together. You've been lying to me this whole time, while planning a future with someone else." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the hurt, the betrayal that had been inflicted. I had been living a lie, trusting her with my heart, while she had been playing a dangerous game behind my back. I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered, finally speaking up. "It just happened. I didn't plan this. But now it's complicated. I'm pregnant, and I don't know what to do." The pregnancy, the thing that had once brought us joy, hope for the future, now felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had trapped us both in a situation that was beyond repair. The reality of it hit me hard. She had been carrying a secret that would change everything about our lives. And now, she expected me to just accept it and move forward. But how could I? "I can't stay," I finally said, my voice trembling. "I can't continue in this relationship. Not after everything you've done. You've betrayed me, and I can't ignore that." Her eyes filled with tears, but instead of pleading with me, she stepped back, as if bracing for the blow. "You don't understand," she said softly. "You don't understand what it's like. I was unhappy, I was confused, and I found comfort in someone else. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could fix it. But now everything is falling apart, and I'm scared." I stood there, feeling numb. I had heard the excuses, but they meant nothing now. Nothing could change the fact that she had chosen to betray me, to betray everything we had built together. The woman I had trusted with my heart had shattered that trust beyond repair, and no amount of explanations or apologies could undo the damage. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said quietly, my voice filled with a sadness I could not hide. "I don't know if I can even look at you the same way again." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She didn't say anything, just stood there, her face a mixture of regret and frustration. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had lost me, and there was no going back. The days that followed that painful conversation felt like a slow, suffocating descent into a reality I was not prepared for. The person I'd spent so many years with, the woman I had promised to share my life with, was now a stranger in my eyes. There was a painful silence that filled the house, a void left by the shattered trust. The love I once felt for her had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of betrayal, and it seemed to seep into every corner of my life. I couldn't look at her without feeling a deep ache in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her without the words choking in my throat. She, too, seemed different. While she had expressed her regret and sorrow for what had happened, it was clear to me that the damage had already been done. I saw it in her eyes, the guilt, the sadness, but also the frustration that I wasn't reacting the way she had expected. She had anticipated that I would be devastated, that I would beg for reconciliation, that I would try to salvage what was left. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had already seen the truth for what it was, and no amount of regret would undo what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her affair. This wasn't just about a moment of weakness or a mistake that could be forgiven with time. It was about everything that had been building beneath the surface for months, maybe even years. The distance, the lies, the changes in her behavior. It all added up to something much deeper than just a kiss. It was the culmination of a broken marriage, one where the emotional connection had faded long before the affair began. I had ignored the signs, told myself that everything was fine, but now it was impossible to ignore the reality. The idea of raising a child with her, a child that might not even be mine, seemed like an impossible task. How could I bring a child into this environment? How could I pretend that everything was okay when all I felt was anger and hurt? It was not just about the affair. It was about the fundamental breakdown of trust that had occurred between us, something I knew could never be repaired. The emotional distance between us had been widening for months, and now, the truth had cracked everything open. There was no going back. We tried to talk again after that initial conversation. She begged me to stay, to work through the pain, to consider the future we could have. But as she spoke, her words began to feel emptier and emptier. The love I once felt for her had turned into something cold and distant, and no matter how much I wanted to feel something, I couldn't. I couldn't ignore what had been done. I couldn't pretend that things would ever be the same. The trust was gone, and without that, there was no foundation for a marriage. One evening, after days of silence, she approached me again. Her voice was soft, pleading. "I know I made a terrible mistake," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "But please, I need you. I can't do this alone. We can fix this. We can raise this baby together. Please don't leave me." But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to respond to her pain. The words felt foreign in my mouth. How could I fix something that had already been broken beyond repair? How could I ignore the truth of what had happened, what she had done? No amount of apologies or promises could erase the betrayal I felt, and I knew that, deep down, we were both simply holding on to the past, too afraid to face the reality of what our marriage had become. "I'm sorry," I finally said, my voice steady but broken. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending. I've tried, but I can't. I need to move on." Her face crumpled in an instant, as if she had expected this, yet could not bear to hear it. She collapsed into tears, but I couldn't offer her comfort. I stood there, watching her, but feeling nothing. My heart had already broken, and the tears she shed were no longer for me. They were for the life we had lost, the future we would never have. The days that followed were filled with the cold, mechanical actions of ending a marriage. We divided our possessions, went through the motions of closing this chapter of our lives. The house, which had once felt like a home, now felt like a prison. There was no warmth in the walls anymore, only the remnants of a life that could never be reclaimed. It felt surreal to pack up the life I had known for years, to realize that I was leaving behind everything we had built together. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't look at her, and I couldn't stay in a place that reminded me of all the broken promises. I moved into a small apartment, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that I couldn't stay in the past. The silence in the apartment was deafening at first, the loneliness overwhelming. But as the days passed, I began to feel a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. The burden of carrying her betrayal was gone, and although I still carried the pain, I could finally start to heal. I did not hear from her for weeks after that. It was as though she had vanished, retreating into her own world to cope with everything that had happened. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I was certain that I needed time to heal before anything else could happen. The betrayal had been too much for me to handle, and I wasn't ready to face her again. I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece. Eventually, I received a letter from her. In it, she apologized once again for everything. She admitted her mistakes and expressed her sorrow, but she also acknowledged that we could never go back to what we had. She said she was raising the baby on her own, and although she wished things had turned out differently, she understood why I had made the decision I did. There was a finality in her words, a sense of acceptance, but it was too little too late. The marriage had ended, and no amount of apologies could undo the past. I never responded. I didn't need to. The decision had already been made, and the chapter was closed. I'd already let go. As painful as it had been, it was the right decision for me. I had to move on. I had to put myself first and focus on healing. I had no idea what the future would look like, but I knew it would be different, and that was enough for me. Looking back, I can see now that it was the only choice I could make. The betrayal, the lies, it had all become too much. But as time has passed, I have learned to forgive myself for what happened. I have learned that it was not my fault. The life I had imagined was shattered, but it opened the door to something new, something I had not expected. And while the journey ahead may not be easy, I know that I'm stronger now than I was before. If you found this story intriguing and thought-provoking, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, real-life tales like this one.